The Dominion chamber was a cathedral of logic, carved from the crystallized bones of a dead star and suspended in orbit over the neutral moon of Haveth. It shimmered with energy fields invisible to most humanoid species but not to the delegation from Earth. They stood awkwardly beneath the high arcing vaults, draped in the austere garments of interstellar diplomacy, outnumbered and out-technologized by nearly every other species present. Humanity had clawed its way into the galactic scene less than 40 years ago. From their backwater spiral arm, they'd hurled crude fusion drives into the void, shouting their presence into the stars with bursts of encoded desperation. That was how the Elisari had found them, harbingers of the Dominion's watchful eye. And now, after a brief, uneasy vetting process, Earth had been granted observer status within the Dominion's lesser court. It was a position of ridicule, not power. Ambassador Arya Kasem stood alone within the central speaking circle, ringed by the quadrants of the assembly. Her voice carried no weight here, but she still had to speak because silence was weakness and weakness was remembered. The incident on Virlos was not a test of loyalty, she said, her tone tight but steady. It was survival. The storm systems exceeded predicted force vectors by more than 200%, my team. A hiss click erupted from the left quadrant, where the Ivanti coalesced in their translucent nutrient shells. Ambassador Javas, a fluid-bodied being with a crystalline cortex, rotated a portion of itself toward the speaking circle. You mistake our purpose here, human. This chamber does not require excuses, it requires data. Kasem inclined her head slightly, then allow me to provide it. You already have, replied Javas, rippling with faint amusement. Your species, fascinatingly fragile as it is, continues to offer unquantifiable anomalies, emotional volatility, reflexive pain behavior. It is no wonder you failed to withstand the atmospheric strain. The Virlos storm was survivable by any species above minimal endurance classification. That your contingent sustained injuries while wearing environmental armor is telling. The laughter was not human. It echoed across several frequency bands, chirping, thrumming, mechanical. Dozens of delegates joined in. The Anthuric blinked their vertical pupils in synchrony, while the Harvan displayed amusement through synchronized flashes of subdermal pigment. To them, pain was a quantifiable metric, tracked, studied, and ranked across evolutionary adaptations, and humans consistently fell into the lower third. Kasem stood motionless, her hands clasped behind her back. Around her, the whispers grew louder. The humans limp from wind. They blade from pressure changes. Even their bones snap like uncured coral. The mockery was surgical, not cruel, merely condescending, an academic autopsy of a lesser species. Then came the voice that silenced the room. You misunderstand, said a calm, resonant tone from the outer circle. It belonged to Commander Turin Holt of Earth Strategic Response Command, tall, rigid in posture, with a jaw set like old iron. He had not been invited to speak, but his voice carried a weight that even the automated sentinels did not immediately challenge. Javas tilted slightly, curious. Speak then, Commander of the Soft-Boned. Turin stepped forward. You test our pain threshold through metrics that do not define us. You measure endurance with heat, pressure, cellular resistance. But you ignore the depth of human pain because it is not physical pain you should fear. A rustle of interest moved across the chamber. The marine psychic empaths shimmered in apprehension. Kasem's eyes narrowed. This wasn't protocol. But Turin continued. You say we limp from wind, that we scream from broken flesh, that we die easier than most, and you're not wrong, but have any of you seen human childbirth? There was silence. Javas blinked. We have studied reproductive processes of your species. The data is inefficient. No, said Turin, you've studied sanitized recordings, monitored vitals, read charts. You haven't stood in the room. You haven't watched a woman, torn open and screaming, hold back death to bring forth life. No enhancements, no neural dampeners, no artificial wombs or psionic buffers, just pain and will. Several delegates emitted caution signals. The word pain spiked across empathic sensors. The marine flinched again. Turin's voice dropped to a near whisper. Your species perfect your births, ours survive them, and still we thrive. A low hum began near the center of the Anthuric quadrant. Their chief biostrategist, Gorvel, stirred in its exoskeletal cradle. You propose this as evidence of resilience. I propose it as proof that your metrics are flawed, Turin replied. You think pain is weakness. For us, it is the crucible of transformation. No one spoke, even Javas refrained. Then from the back ranks, a Childbirth philosopher moved forward, a being so old and revered its words were rarely heard in public discourse. I would see this childbirth. Gasps and signal flares rippled through the chamber. Even Kasem turned in alarm. You what? She said. The vault philosopher raised its 6 thin arms. I would witness what the humans claim defines them, arrange it, a birth, without enhancement, without anesthetic, under neutral supervision, let the assembly observe. Kasem took a step back. That's a human life. But Turin nodded. Yes, he said, we'll give you a witness. Behind his eyes something stirred, a storm not of wind but of memory, of cries in steel corridors, of blood on ceramic floors, of something sacred that no alien metric could ever measure. And deep within him, he knew what was coming next. They wanted data, they'd get truth. Pain, yes, but not weakness, never that. The request rippled across galactic networks with the velocity of scandal. No species had ever formally submitted an unmodified biological process for observational analysis, especially not one so intertwined with their cultural and emotional identity. Yet the humans agreed almost too easily. 3 cycles later, a section of the orbital medical tier aboard the Dominion's Genesis station was cordoned off, refitted and reclassified as a cross-cultural observation theater. The chamber was cold and sterile in design, an obsidian shell laced with panspectral transparency. Every sensor known to the assembly's science arm was installed: biomonitors, neural mapping arrays, gravimetric stabilizers, emotion resonance transceivers. The humans brought none of their own tech, per agreement. Only the woman. Her name was Dr. Leona Myerk, age 32, specialist in xenogenetics, third-generation Martian colonist and mother-to-be. She had refused sedation, refused neural gate dampeners. She had reviewed the terms of the Assembly's observation accord herself, demanding full unfiltered presence of at least 24 species representatives in the chamber, not as digital projections, in person. She wanted them to feel it. Inside the primary viewing arc, Commander Turin Holt stood beside Kasem, both clad in the matte charcoal of Earth's Diplomaticops uniform. Kasem leaned in close, her voice taut. Do you understand the magnitude of this, Turin? We're gambling our species' dignity on a spectacle they think will humiliate us. Turin's jaw flexed. No, we're showing them what they've never bothered to measure. Through the field glass, Leona lay back on the inclined support bed, breathing in slow, controlled rhythms. Her partner, Eli Navarro, remained at her side, fingers entwined with hers. He said nothing. Their gazes met, steady, calm, unshakable. At the far end of the room, Javas floated in a gravishell tuned to its native pressure. Beside it, the marine emissary veil stirred, pupils wide as ocean voids. The Anthuric craned their segmented necks forward. Gorvel's carapace emitted a sequence of low clicks, analyzing fetal oxygen levels. A signal tone chimed. Labor had begun. The attending Dominion-neutral mediatex announced it clinically, cervix at 4 centimeters, contractions regular, Earth-normal fetal heartbeat. Leona did not scream, not yet. She closed her eyes and exhaled like a woman who had long ago accepted pain as a companion, not a threat. Hours passed. The temperature shifted subtly, adjusted by Dominion algorithms to reduce interspecies stress reactions. Marion trembled visibly, not from cold but from empathic saturation. One leaned against the wall, whispering in their native harmonic tongue. She feels like fire. Leona grunted, her voice jagged. She had moved to a sitting squat now, guided only by a midwife she'd chosen from Earth's oldest birthing traditions. Her body trembled, soaked in sweat. No one touched her save for Eli. The child did not come quickly. It came through her. When the pain peaked, sensors flared. Marion collapsed from empathic overload. Javas retreated halfway into its shell. Even Gorvel lowered its forward limbs and clicked in somber silence. None of them had known. This was not the pain of injury, it was not the shriek of defeat. This was pain shaped into defiance, into perseverance, into creation. Then it happened. One final surge, one last cry drawn from the marrow of her ancestors. The child emerged. Bloody, breathing, alive. Leona collapsed backwards, gasping, not broken, not diminished, transformed. The room was silent. No translation pings, no biometric queries, only awe. Kasem turned slowly to face the delegation arc. She saw what she'd waited for, the subtle shift in posture, the dilated pupils, the flaring signal threads of reevaluation. The Marion whispered again, trembling, they give pain form, they birth through agony. Turin stepped forward into the circle of witnesses. This, he said quietly, is why you will never measure us properly, because pain doesn't end us, it refines us. Gorvel stirred. This violates evolutionary efficiency. It is reckless. And yet here we are, Kasem said, her voice laced with iron. still standing, still growing, still birthing children in defiance of the very universe. The vault philosopher spoke again, a whisper across all frequencies. Submit full recording and the mother's permission for neural resonance trace. This event must be entered into the archives of sentient endurance. Leona stirred in the recovery bed. Her voice was hoarse but unshaken. You want my memory, you can have it, but understand it's not data, it's a legacy. And the child cried for the first time, its voice rising through the silence like a war horn in the dark. Something had changed. Not everything, not yet. But they had seen. And what they saw would echo. They called it the Myrick event. The Dominion's Central Archive classified it under cognitive recalibration incidents, biological species, a sterile label that masked the upheaval it had caused. But across countless systems and data thought nexuses, the footage of Leona Myrick's childbirth spread like fire in vacuum. No encryption slowed it, no sensors caught it in time. From the icy mining colonies of the Lorthan Edge to the cloistered neural cloisters of the Cawthron Synapse monks, sentient minds watched. Not all understood, but none dismissed it. The vault philosopher convened an emergency session of the Sentient Durability Consortium. For the first time in millennia, human physiology was granted provisional inclusion in the threshold trials, a set of endurance gauntlets once considered too hazardous for species without regenetically enhanced biology. The Ivanti protested. So did the Harvan and the Creel Osirites, whose own reproductive processes occurred entirely within collective psionic matrices, without sensation, without risk. But the protest fell flat. Because those who had been in the chamber remembered, and those who hadn't had watched the mothers scream, unfiltered, raw, not of suffering alone but of resolve. The aftershocks began quietly. First a request, then another. Marine enclaves requested human doulas to speak at their temples. A delegation of Enthuric biologists sought interviews with Earth's midwives. A renowned philosopher petitioned for sabbatical, seeking to witness earthborn rites of willed suffering. And beneath it all, the Dominion's Defense Doctrine Board flagged a red tier update. Human adaptive response to high-threshold physical trauma nonlinear, emotionally mediated, unpredictable, potential for strategic exploitation high. It was the kind of note that reshaped threat matrices. Turin Holt read the report in silence aboard the S-Ark Remembrance, currently docked in the orbital dryards over Titan Minor. The briefing floated in front of him, half-translucent, pulsing with crimson markers. He didn't smile, but he did exhale, slow and deep. Behind him, Major Sato stepped in, her expression unreadable. She was part of Earth's Black Signal Corps, a unit specialized in information asymmetry and cultural warfare. She said nothing until the doors sealed behind her. They're moving to revise the Quadrant Contact Index. Humans go from Tier 5 to Tier 3, 2, if we volunteer for the trials. Turin glanced sideways. We will. Even after what Myrick went through. She volunteered to change the future. We dishonor her by slowing now. Sato nodded. There's more. The Creel Osirites filed a motion. They want proof it wasn't a staged act, the old pain theater accusation. He turned fully, eyes sharp. They'll get it. How? We give them more births. Sato blinked. You're serious. We show them it wasn't a miracle, it was humanity. Weeks passed. Then in a remote sector of the Draxel Verge, during a routine mineral expedition led by joint Dominion-human crews, disaster struck. A subterranean collapse, 29 lives buried under 5 kilometers of alloyed bedrock, among them 2 humans, Captain Mariel Sykes and Corporal Adam Dre. Both survived the initial cave-in, only one was in labor. The Dominion dispatched a mining drill craft with 10-hour delay, estimated survival odds negligible. But when they arrived, the humans had already extracted themselves. Mariel Sykes had delivered a child, in the dark, amid shifting stone and oxygen rationing. Adam Dre had cut the umbilical cord with the edge of a fractured helmet visor. They emerged into the light, covered in blood and dust and victory. There were no med beds, no painkillers, just resolve. The footage again went viral. This time, the ridicule stopped entirely. Dominion training manuals issued updates on human birthing protocols as indicators of psychological resilience under duress. The phrase pain-forged cognition appeared in 5 languages. Even the Osirites withdrew their skepticism. Back on Earth, Leona Myrick stood before the assembly for the second time, this time not as a subject, but as a lecturer, a guide. She held her child in one arm, dressed not in formal regalia but in simple earthborn fabric. Her speech was short. "You wanted to measure pain," she said, "but pain is not a number. Pain is the shadow of meaning, of life making room for itself. You've conquered suffering by removing it. We learn to transcend it." And across the sea of beings, gelatinous, crystalline, neural, metallic, something stirred. Not applause, not words. Recognition. A day later, Turin Holt received an encrypted transmission from the Marine Harmonic High Council. Its message was brief. "We believed endurance was survival. We were wrong. Endurance is rebirth. We will learn." Beneath it, a second line. "Do humans teach?" He answered in one word. Yes, the Dominion's perception of Earth shifted like gravity bending near a singularity. Where once the human file had been bookmarked for containment and observation, now it was under expansion. What began as mockery had metastasized into intrigue, then urgency. Human pain, unrefined, unmanaged, untreated, was not a flaw, it was a key. In the sterile vaults of the Osirite Neural Bank, scholars began reclassifying pain thresholds across known species. For the first time, the human entry bore a modifier, nonlinear response vector, transcendental potential, a phrase alien in syntax but precise in meaning. The humans were no longer predictable. And in the Dominion, unpredictability was power. It was not long before conflict found them again. The Tailic Hierophants, zealots from the Scorched Spiral, had long defied Dominion authority, operating on fringe stars beyond the Origi Rim. They despised technological dependence, worshipped agony as divine initiation, and mutilated their own bodies as a right of will. For centuries, they'd been dismissed as dangerous but containable. Until they witnessed the Myrick event. To them, it was not a lesson, it was a challenge. Within a single cycle, Tailic ships raided an Earth-aligned research outpost on Elton's Reach. No demands, no threats, only a message carved into the airlock in blood and plasma. "Come, prove your suffering is sacred." The Dominion refused direct involvement. Earth was still Tier 3, and this was a Tier 1 response. No aid, no fleets. Humanity would answer alone. Turin Holt took command of the counter-response unit, Task Force Ardent. The name was intentional, burning, not broken. Its ranks were lean, hybrid formations of Earth's best, tacticians from Ganymede, shock troopers from Angola arcologies, voidwalkers born in the orbital rings of Val's Marineris. They knew the Tailic wouldn't fight conventionally. But Earth had moved past conventional. On the frozen planetoid of Varan 4, they made first contact. It was not battle, it was ordeal. The Tailic deployed heat radiation chambers, massive pressure furnaces that pulsed with lethal waves. They called it the Purging. No armor could endure it long. But humans stepped in without shields. They timed breath, memorized cooling cycles, used old techniques, blood-slick gauze, deep tissue breath control, hallucination redirection. 3 squads passed through. 2 emerged. They brought with them Tailic prisoners, dazed and silent. Not from drugs, but from confusion. "They do not cry," one Tailic murmured through broken teeth. "They carry their pain." The Dominion took notice again, not just of Earth's resilience, but its strategic agility. Humanity didn't just adapt under pressure. They redefined the battlefield around suffering, turning vulnerability into terrain. Soon after, Earth was invited to submit candidates for the threshold trials. Not observers, competitors. Every few cycles, the trials were held, testing physical and psychological capacity under regulated torment, not cruelty but calibration. Species from across the Dominion sent their champions. No human had ever been allowed entry. Now they were requested. Kasem herself stood in the arena, high above the spiral pit where the final trial would take place. A testival called the corridor, a narrow trench of shifting gravimetric tides, acidic winds, and sensory overload. No species had ever crossed it conscious. Those who had emerged awake, emerged changed, psionically marked, or catatonically broken. The human representative stood quietly. She wasn't military. She wasn't enhanced. Her name was Clara Jin Ramos, a nurse from Manila Colony, 36 years old, had birthed 2 children during a long-term station lockdown, once stitched a wound closed with a fishing hook. She walked into the corridor barefoot. The storm began. The winds flayed skin, the gravwells twisted joints. The screams of failed competitors echoed across memory projectors, replayed through psychic feedback. Clara didn't fall. She moved. One step, then another. Her knees buckled, she kept going. Blood ran from her ears. Her fingers broke against the stone as she crawled the final meters. And she made it. The observers stared in silence as she collapsed, not in defeat, but in completion. The Marine were the first to rise in honor. The cheer followed. Even the Osirites blinked their psychic lights in salute. It was no longer a matter of respect. It was the beginning of recalibration. Later, as MedTech stabilized her, Clara opened one cracked eye and said, "You want to understand us? Try building a life in a broken world, then fight to keep it alive." It was not just a quote. It was doctrine. Earth's status rose to Tier 1, not because of weapons, not because of fleets. Because they had walked through pain and come out still whole. The Taluk retreated. But others began to reach out, not to challenge Earth but to learn. From Mars to Enceladus, human pain became the subject of analysis, but more than that, it became myth, not just agony, but choice in the face of it. The Myrick event was no longer a singularity. It was a signal. Humanity had arrived. Not as conquerors. As teachers of the threshold, the stars no longer whispered of humanity as anomaly, they spoke of Earth as catalyst. The Dominion, once a body of calculation and protocol, now bent toward a new axis. Species once content with sterilized efficiency and pain elimination therapies found themselves re-examining centuries of doctrine. The galactic narrative, long dominated by empires that conquered discomfort through superior engineering, now had a disruptive counterpoint, a civilization that evolved through adversity, not around it. It was not just politics that shifted. Culture did. Art forms once confined to abstract sensory modulation began exploring the aesthetics of struggle. Osirite sculptors carved representations of childbirth into neural stone. Marian singers wrote operas in mimicry of human labor rhythms, broadcasting them across psychic wavelengths. The Iventi, though skeptical still, funded a multi-cycle study titled The Voluntary Embrace of Pain, a human case study in sentient ascension. But it was the Enthurak who took the next great step. They requested an exchange. Not trade, not diplomacy. Integration. 50 of their kind, newly spawned and bred without their pain-suppressing gene line, were offered to Earth for what the Enthurak called the trial of becoming. The offer was met with awe and hesitation, not for the gesture itself, but for what it implied. They didn't just want to study pain. They wanted to feel it as humans did, as a crucible, as a rite. On Mars, deep within the Kolob crater complex, Earth established the Threshold Initiative, a collaboration zone where species of the Dominion could witness and participate in human processes once considered barbaric. Labor wards were built, but not for humans. They were for witnessing. The first non-human to undergo unmedicated reproduction was a Rylathi female named Kale Varin, genetically modified to gestate without neural intervention. She had once mocked humanity's obsession with suffering during a recorded panel 2 years prior. She now held her hybrid child in quivering limbs and whispered through ragged breath, "They were never weak, we were blind." She wasn't alone. Across 14 systems, analogs of the Threshold Initiative sprouted like seeds in terraformed soil, not in imitation of humanity, but in response to it. A ripple of redefinition began to sweep across the Dominion's core tenets. And as the Dominion evolved, so did Earth. Not in power, in purpose. Commander Turin Holt retired from military command and assumed leadership of Earth's delegation to the High Quadrant Assembly. His first motion as representative was not strategic, but philosophical. "Let us not be remembered for how we survived," he said, standing before the 9,000-eye quorum of the Central Forum, "but for how we taught others to live with meaning in the presence of pain." It passed unanimously. The change did not go unnoticed by humanity's oldest critics. A new species, the Vreeked Enclave, emerged from deep-time hibernation on the edge of the Scutum sector. Their envoys bore weapons older than Earth's continents and minds, shaped by silicate memory networks spanning epochs. They studied the archives. They saw the Myrick event. And they sent a challenge. A duel not of war but of endurance. They would subject themselves to Earth's birthing trial. 3 of their own would undergo full embryonic gestation without suppression. If they survived, Earth would be invited into the concord of enduring civilizations, a council older than the Dominion, silent for 5 million cycles. If they failed, the invitation would never be offered again. Earth accepted. The trials were held in orbit over G on a vessel co-designed by both species. The procedure was untested, interspecies gestation fraught with biological uncertainty. But Earth had never thrived under certainty. The births came, 3 vrieked, each encoded with modified genomes for gestation, entered labor. One died, another broke under psychic shock. But the third, a pale stone-skinned matriarch named Harselveer, endured. When it was over, she did not speak for days. Then, at the final assembly of the conquered, she emerged and offered Earth its final designation. Not primitive, not resilient, catalyst ascendant. Humanity joined the conquered. Not as inheritors, as examples. Pain had once been their shame, their shadow, their joke. Now it was their banner. Their threshold had become the galaxy's crucible. And from it a new era was born.